Forspoken has launched on the Windows Store with full achievements. It's an action RPG from Square Enix that PlayStation purchased at least 2 years of console exclusivity on, but we're covering it for our PC fandom. It is not a good game in any single area, and it feels underbaked pretty much everywhere. Using the classic regular person transported to a magical land trope, you end up being Frey, a wisecracking career criminal from the worst depiction of New York that I have ever seen. You'll use magic parkour and pretty but terrible feeling combat to work your way across the world of Althea. How does the game run? Is it any fun? And is the dialogue as bad as it seems? Let's find out together in the XboxEra review of Forspoken. I played this review on PC. The Windows Store and Steam versions of the game felt identical, and I mainly ended up playing on Steam as I had that code first. Performance on my AMD system of 5800X, 6700 XT, and 64 gigs of RAM was atrocious, was how this game looks. Running at 1440p in medium settings, I rarely broke 60 frames per second while in cutscenes and routinely dropped to 40 FPS or lower in combat. Those cutscenes are my biggest issue with the game. Starting things off, you're in New York. Your character Frey is once again in legal trouble, and the world's least believable judge lets her off with only community service for her third felony. This version of New York is crazily empty, ugly, quiet, and full of theater rejects masquerading as gang members. Every time you get to walk for 15 feet, you'll then be pulled into a cutscene. Sometimes they start with a fade to black. Sometimes you stand in place for 3 seconds waiting for the cutscene to kick in. It is jarring through the entirety of the game's 8 or so hour long runtime, and for the first 2 hours of my playthrough, I barely touched my controller once I got that to work properly. After stumbling around New York, you randomly find a vambrace that transports you to a mysterious land full of Game of Thrones rejects. You are a chosen hero, and it's all entirely predictable plot-wise. Forspoken has the trappings of something that was much larger in scope, and heck, in early coverage, people were predicting this would be a 30-plus hour campaign. And it feels like so much of the open world was cut for time because it's all barren and completely uninteresting. And the fact that the engine can't even seem to go from outside to inside for most locations during even cutscenes, and instead does a slow fade to black, short load, then fade back in is ridiculous. This happened in one scene where a door was being blown off its hinges. The door was hit, the game faded to black, came back a few seconds later, and resumed outside. There is just something fundamentally wrong with the Luminous engine, as this game looks and performs far worse than even Final Fantasy XV did on far weaker hardware. And no part of this game feels fully formed, especially the combat. The main thing I remember from the original teasers of Forspoken was the magical parkour movement system. It looked fast, cool, and fun as hell to dash around like a methed out wizard. In practice, it is constantly frustrating, slow, and hindered by terrible world design. And the combat itself fares no better, with an emphasis on incredibly flashy spells, but your actual control while fighting feels minimal at best when things get frantic. On your right trigger are your offensive spells. You either hold it down and let it go, or press it quickly to change things up slightly, but it never really feels responsive. Your left trigger controls your support spells, and they start with the maddeningly long cooldowns that make early game combat just slow. To get access to new and more powerful spells, you'll need to either level up or, and this part drove me crazy, find puddles of magic on the ground. Getting these ticks up a number which you can then use to unlock or upgrade your spells. It feels like the experience-based leveling system just wasn't working, so they got together and decided to just throw a bunch of ugly swirling white textures out into the open world and call it a day. These mana fonts are really one of the few things you will actually find in the open world, which you will traverse by holding forward and B. That activates your magical parkour in the open world, and pressing or holding B during combat is pretty much an I win card for free never-ending dodges, which have massive invincibility frames. Playing on the normal difficulty, I rarely felt close to dying, and the few times I did gave me a get out of death free card on a short cooldown where your sentient vambrace auto-magically blocks the killing blow. Combat-wise, the game feels like you're constantly using bumpers to scroll through your spells, tossing out a spell, then holding B to dodge a bunch. It never feels tight, fun, satisfying, or like you're really in control. The fact that it takes so long just to get through the 3 or so hours of cutscenes to then be stuck playing something so poor feeling only added to my frustration. But perhaps the biggest thing Forspoken has been known for in pre-launch is its dialogue. Frey has a potty mouth and her go-to choices of words are the S and F word. She says them a lot and at weird times. I'm no saint and I swore quite a bit while playing this game too. The issue with the dialogue isn't just that it's routinely poorly written, it's that the direction behind each cutscene is even worse. Odd camera angles, constant fades to black, a jarring lack of music or any ambient noise or crowd noise at time team up to make something dreadful to watch. I streamed the first half of my playthrough and I had lost my voice by the end of it. It's an extremely frustrating experience to constantly lose control of your character. Even in the open world while running around with the parkour system, I would constantly get stopped for a tutorial or cutscene, and I admit I never once cared about the story. Character motivations and their abilities constantly shift just to serve the narrative. In one scene, things were going bad, something very important was on the ground in front of me, but Frey refused to pick it up for an insane reason. Next thing you know, I can't go back because the important thing has been destroyed when it was completely avoidable logically. This game was delayed a lot, but it still feels like so much was cut to make launch. And that goes for the graphics and music as well. Graphically, Forspoken is a occasionally okay, but mostly ugly game, due in large part to its terrible lighting system and inconsistent texture quality. Main character models can look odd and wooden, and then a side character comes along and she's damn near lifelike. The bloom on PC feels completely out of whack with your outside of a house being completely blindingly white while you're inside. Once you head outside and the game adjusts, it then feels dreary and overcast. The skyboxes are all low resolution, hideous textures full of rainbow barf. The one area that can look consistently great are the particle effects, but they're terribly optimized and brought my decently beefy rig to its knees even if I lowered things down to 1080p in medium settings. The soundtrack doesn't match the tone of the dialogue well, and the dialogue is delivered okay most of the time. But sometimes the dialogue will be serious or goofy and then the soundtrack just doesn't match it. And the same few main themes play through almost every time with a woman going, yeah, in nearly every damn track in the exact same way. Wrapping things up, I came into Forspoken unsure of what I would find. Its initial teasers promised a gorgeous magical world full of incredible sights. Instead, we've been given something boring that runs terribly and has a story just chock full of overused tropes. The combat fares no better, and it's retailing for $70 on PC at launch. Do yourself a favor and only sate your curiosities once this game is on a very deep sale.